Good morning, people. How are we doing? Today is the 25th day of June 2023. As you can see down the bottom, it's 7:23 in the morning on a Sunday. I think it's a Sunday. Good God, I hope it's a Sunday. Let me see. Indeed, it is a Sunday. I'm going to give you a little update on what happened with the Wagner group. As I said yesterday, the reason you don't fucking, I keep looking at the middle of the ring. The reason you don't fucking do mercenaries, you don't privatize things like prison systems, police forces, in my opinion, fucking healthcare. The reason you don't privatize these things, especially, I don't know, military, you don't hire fucking mercenary fucking outfits like Blackwater, for example, whatever they call themselves, Academy, whatever they call themselves now. The reason you don't do that is right in the fucking word, mercenaries. They just give a shit about the fucking money. It's all they care about is the fucking money. I told you yesterday that it was much ado about nothing, and it turns out it was. Now, after Scott Ritter and people, Scott Ritter saying, look, it's suicide. They're going to walk in there and just be trashed and destroyed. Of course, fearmonger. Overhype to get as many clicks as possible. That was never going to happen, and I told you that yesterday morning. It was never going to happen. Turns out it didn't happen, and they have, of course, withdrawn. The biggest damage to the state of Russia, from what I can understand, is there's about 10,000 rubles, $10,000 worth of damage to various roads. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. The gate outside a circus was destroyed because somebody wanted to park their tank there. And the road was destroyed also by, or damaged by tanks driving on them. However, of course, they've turned around and left. Folks out there are trying to act as if this is somehow some big ploy between the Wagner Group ownership and the leadership of Russia in order to suck money out of, I think I'm recorded, to suck money out of fucking the deep state. Billions of dollars or some number's been tossed out there. And, it's possible that money was tossed out there. But it wasn't a ploy for that. What you had was a fucking oligarch billionaire who's never fucking been in a fight in his life or been in a battle, much less in his life. A billionaire, still a small oligarch, thinking that he should be given basically control of the entire Russian military, or at least their ground forces. And in his effort to make more fucking money. So he can get to that big table during Thanksgiving dinner with the big oligarchs. He wants to sit up there with the Zuckerbergs and the Musks and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and people like that. And so he had been pushing after the success with Bakhmut that he had in his little Wagner group. They've been pushing for a new contract. It's time for them to sign a new contract, and Russia sent them new contracts to sign. However, he didn't like the terms of those contracts, and so he wrote his own contract, which basically said, you're going to give us infinite amounts of money and infinite amounts of new weapons, and you're going to give us as many new soldiers as we want. You're going to force them to come work for Wagner, and I'm going to make money off all this and become richer. Because look at what I did with Bakhmut, what I did with Bakhmut, which is they want a conflict with a seriously weakened fucking Ukrainian defenses, a Ukrainian offensive force, which has basically got a bunch of conscripts that were ripped off of the fucking streets of western fucking Ukraine and thrown into a bus by force by a bunch of Nazis who are recruiting, and they were fucking given guns and told to go out there and go up against trained fucking mercenaries and others in Bakhmut. And of course they lost. So on the heels of that marvelous victory, this jackass thinks he's like, Napoleon or some shit. Thinks he's General MacArthur or some shit. And so he was demanding money. And he wanted what appears to be not just more money. It appears to be he wanted to at least privatize the entire ground forces of the Russian defenses. That wasn't going to happen, ever. That failed. That fucking contract was laughed at last week on Monday, and so he staged the fucking bullshit thing on Friday to give him some semblance of cover for trying to move on fucking Moscow, or threaten to move on Moscow until he got his way with his contract. That's exactly, listen, I couldn't have put it better. I hate to keep patting myself on the back, but I'm going to. Why the fuck not? It's a free country so far. Kind of. For white guys. As I say that, as I'm soaking wet from. Can you see that? Can you see? I'm water stain. Yeah, you can right there, a little bit. There you go. Fucking doing my neighbor's lawn, having to move a fucking hose with some fucking sprinkler holes cut in it. I told you yesterday, you don't get involved with these fuckers because it's always about the money and they always want fucking more. Apparently, they're still going to offer some. Well, the sticking point for the owner of Wagner Group, with the contract that was offered in June 11th or June 10th by the Russian Ministry of Defense. The sticking point was he wasn't getting all this new fucking money and all these new fucking things, and he wasn't becoming the Czar. But it was also, they were demanding that the mercs sign a contractual agreement pledging allegiance to Russia. And he was not about to have that. The billionaire wasn't about to have that. Because he said their allegiance is to me and me alone. Because I'm God. I'm God Emperor. I am Paul Atreides. And the fat, old, bald-headed dude who'd never fucking really swung a fist in anger before in his life, much less fired a shot, wasn't having that. And so he staged his bullshit little fucking they attacked us scene, which I told you was bullshit and was clearly bullshit. And anybody who looked at it, who didn't tell you in the news that it was completely bullshit, you should never go back to them again. Because it was obviously bullshit. And they obviously staged it. For this. You don't mix profits with, prison systems, policing, healthcare, in my opinion, education of your fucking children, and war. Of course, we are steadily pushing towards privatization of all of that shit and more in the glorious free markets USA. God bless you, fucking Milton Friedman. All the statues they tore down, by the way, during the last fucking destabilization campaign, they got a new one now using children, African-American children. They're doing with African-American children what our groomers did in Hong Kong with fucking kids there. But back during the last destabilization campaign, they pulled down all the fucking statues. They're going to replace them. And I guarantee you they're going to start replacing them with people like fucking Milton Friedman. And maybe Zygmunt Brzezinski. Friedrich von Hayek. People who really deserve a fucking statue. Anyway, let's take a look at a little bit what I got here for you. I'm not going to read too much of it because of time constraints. It turns out that now we are saying, the New York Times at least is saying, that we knew about the plans, the coup plans in advance. U.S. intelligence agencies strongly suspected that Evgeny Prigozhin was planning a major move against Russian government days before the Wagner chief ordered his troops to march on Moscow. The New York Times reported on Saturday, citing sources, unnamed sources, of course. According to unnamed U.S. officials interviewed in the paper, the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden and military commanders were briefed on the Wagner preparations as early as Wednesday. I told you. Monday, he was pissed off. Prigozhin was pissed off because they weren't fucking giving him what he wanted. They weren't making him czar of the military of Russia. A for-profit czar. As additional details came in, another briefing attended by a narrow group of congressional leaders was reportedly held on Thursday. So we were told all this shit was going to happen. Why were we told all this shit was going to happen? We were told all this shit was going to happen because the stuff that he was pissed off about, he's been talking about for the last 3 weeks. And since the June 10th contract was refused, and it was all in the papers. I'll show you that. So some bright people said, hey, we got a possible opportunity here. Maybe we can fucking have a chat with him and prod him along into this and throw some money at him and tell him this is what we do with fucking proxy armies in other countries. We find disaffected, unhappy little groups, and we tell them, you go with us, you sign on with us, man, I'll make you fucking czar. You'll be czar of the fucking, you'll be the head of the whole military. Hell, we might make you czar of Russia if you like that. How would you like that? And you can really be you can really sit at the table with the big boys after that. I'm sure that conversation happened. Did money change hands? Possibly. I don't know. Some people are suggesting it did. Some people are saying it was all fucking bullshit. Between fucking, they were playing 4D chess. The Russians were, and we just were suckered into it. I doubt that. That's not true. Prigozhin is a fucking greedy, selfish billionaire who wanted more money, and he thought that the victory at Bakhmut would buy him that fucking new contract. You know, he figured, how can he refuse us? We just won this glorious battle with these fucking scrubs. We just won this glorious battle for Russia. The Russian people will be on our side. And that is the tone that his announcement on Friday was. The one that he made 15 minutes after they set the fucking contact cement fires and filmed that shit for his radio announcement. That was his tone. How can they possibly? But they did. The Russians did. They said nope. So we've known this. Here's a little update. That's the guy. He looks like what fucking Zelensky's going to look like in about maybe 5 years. If he keeps doing all the fucking blow he's doing. You know who he looks like? He looks like that guy from CNN who did that fake Scud rocket attack thing in front of those plastic plants. And a blackout fucking screen behind him. Remember that fucking thing? Jesus Christ. Here are the troops. Here are the things. Wagner's troop has withdrawn from Russia's Lipetsk region. Local authorities have said they've withdrawn all these things. So there you go. It's all over and done with. They also mentioned that U.S. intelligence was suspected that he was going to do this. They don't mention the fact that he probably was paid something to do this. We will find out how that works TASS really doesn't have much on the fucking story because it's not big news to them. But here's the thing that is part and parcel of this. This is a quote from Prigozhin himself. This is from Sputnik, and I'll post links to all this stuff. Apparently, Lukashenko mediated some kind of conversation between them. I don't know what the fucking mediation was. As if Russia was at any point in time under threat. And it was only the tolerance of Vladimir Putin that they didn't just... The tolerance of Vladimir Putin, they didn't just fucking take a fucking couple of planes and wipe him out. The tolerance of Vladimir Putin and the fact that they knew that it would be a victory for the United States and for the United States intelligence if they wiped out fucking Wagner Group on the fucking streets on the streets in Russia. Then we could say, "Oh my God, they're in chaos," which of course they were saying anyway, but of course they weren't. So I don't know what the negotiation was, because Wagner got nothing out of it. Wagner Group got nothing out of it. Prigozhin got nothing out of it. This is what he said. They wanted to disband the Wagner PMC. So we set off on June 23rd on our march of justice. He says they wanted to disband Wagner. And this is not the only place that I've seen this. This is from Newsweek, and this is from an article that was written well before. This was written on the 20th. This was what I was talking about before. The 20th was last Tuesday. So it was talking about shit that happened prior to last Tuesday. Remember, this past Friday, 4 days later, 3 days later, is when this whole thing kicked off. But this was published on the 20th. Prigozhin raises the stakes in battle with Russian Ministry of Defense. Military Defense. Dumbass. If you go way down here. Now, this article will basically tell you what I just told you. That there was a new contract. They wanted a new contract. He came back with his new contract. He says, this is the contract you're going to sign. And, of course, they laughed at him. And actually, according to him, the lady at the Ministry of Defense became unambiguously confrontational. And then they slammed the fucking window in front of him and left and ran off. What did he say there? He attempts to hand over his letter to the Ministry of Defense. They're not accepting the letter, so now we will make it public. He was pissed off that they weren't accept, and they laughed at him. Ministry of Defense, Shogu Sergei? Am I pronouncing that correctly? They just laughed at him. He had not signed that contract. He didn't sign the contract they offered. He signed his contract, and his contract is very different, obviously. Listen to this. In a message posted via his press service's Telegram channel on Sunday, Prigozhin said he is still awaiting a reply from the Defense Ministry. This is Tuesday now. This is last Tuesday. We are waiting for an official response. As soon as it arrives, we'll publish it. Prigozhin's Wagner Group played a critical role in Russia's effort to seize the industrial town of Bakhmut in Ukraine's eastern region. That's where they fought against the fucking kidnapped conscripts who never had a gun in their hand in their lives. Congratulations. He ramped up a public criticism of Russia's military leadership, including Shoigu, before his troops withdrew from Bakhmut this month. He has accused the Defense Ministry of intentionally depriving his fighters of ammunition and support. Anton Gerashenko, an advisor to Ukraine's Ministry of Internal Affairs, said he believes Shoigu's order, quote, may be a consequence of his conflict with Prigozhin and an attempt to take Wagner operatives under his control, end quote. This guy thought that they were going to bust up his fucking little power trip private army, which would make sense after he decides to submit a new contract, making himself czar of Russia's military, privatize the Tsar of Russia's military. And if they don't sign it, he's going to march. He's going to stage a false flag fucking attack on his people to give him some PR cover. And then he's going to march on Moscow. So it would make sense to bust it up. It would make sense right now for fucking Vladimir Putin to say, everything's fine, don't worry about it, and then fucking arrest the piece of shit. They're going to give some of their fucking, they said some of their fucking, the Wagner Group's mercenaries, the opportunity to sign those military contracts with the fucking Ministry of Defense, including that whole, we swear an oath to defend Russia, as they should. But they're not going to give them to all of them. Why? Because as I told you yesterday, some of them are straight up fucking Nazis. Some of them are just scumbags from other fucking countries who went there for the fucking money that Prigozhin was paying. Some shouldn't be given license to carry a gun. Does that mean they'll break them up and they'll absorb them back into the Ministry of Defense in Russia? They probably should. Whether they will go that far, he is still a billionaire after all. And he's not the only billionaire in fucking Russia. So, again, people say, Russia's commies. They're not commies. They do, in fact, have oligarchs, some of whom were made when, we regime changed them and then we imposed fucking the glorious free markets on them. Before Putin came along. So, but there's still some who were there and still have influence. They can't dictate policy, either foreign or domestic, but they still have influence. And so, of course, for him to take out one, even after a fucking attempted, or at least purported, threatened armed insurrection, for him to take one out, I don't know how that would play with the rest. It's like I said the other day with the going down in the yellow submarine. What's his face can try all he wants. Fucking James Cameron can try all he wants to ease the minds of the other fucking uber rich that his submarines, his brand of fucking stupid fucking submarines to go under the water for the super rich, for the uber rich, are perfectly safe. The problem is, once the uber rich sense danger, their little fucking spidey senses go off, albeit uber rich people getting mushed underwater, or uber rich people being arrested for trying to overreach into the affairs of the state. Once that happens, the rest of the uber rich kind of get all sketchy. I guess. I've never had to deal with them. But my guess is they probably would. So who knows what he's going to do. But I do know he didn't sign the contract. They're not signing the contract. They didn't do jack shit. They just sat back and said, come on. One of these articles will tell you where they said, okay, really? Y'all are coming to Moscow, huh? Y'all are fucking up our roads. All right. And they called this small band of special ops guys. I don't know if they're Spaznot or whatever it is. I don't know who they, but they're Chechens. And they got this one fucking group of Chechens, and they said, okay, we'll send those guys to deal with you. And apparently the threat of that was enough, and they said, nah. They didn't have the stomach to fight against their own countrymen. That is, the ones who were obviously Russian. They weren't all Russian. But they didn't have the stomach. And he knew, and I'm sure the billionaire knew that from the get-go. The only question is, the stupid little staged thing. Once U.S. intelligence perceived the problem, and they got money, I'm sure, ready to go, and they flew over, or they had somebody on the ground nearby rush over and make the offer to Prigozhin. The question becomes, was it Prigozhin who decided to come up with the "they attacked us" story, which of course is going to be gone now. And the story is going to be gone because it was always bullshit. Was it Prigozhin and his people who came up with that, or was it fucking U.S. intelligence? We need some kind of cover, because they're just so used to lying and creating fucking acts of terrorism and shit as cover. We need some kind of cover for your PR on this. Let's do this real quick. I told you how fucking shoddy it looked, how bullshit it looked. It looked like it was just thrown together. They dug a trench, they threw some sticks in it, they took some fucking contact cement, set it on fire, and they got some dickhead from CNN to act as if he's looking at the burning of the Hindenburg. Okay? Was it U.S. intelligence? Was it our guys? Was it McKinsey Group? Who knows? If I had to guess, I would say yeah. So the end of the story is that's pretty much it. This is an article from the 11th, where the Russian Defense Ministry forces all mercenary groups to sign contract with Russian Ministry of Defense, and the Wagner group's chief refused. All Russian military volunteer formations will be forced to sign contracts with the Ministry of Defense. Meanwhile, Yevgeny Prigozhin, financier of the Wagner private military company, PMC, says that the group's fighters will not do so. And that was really the problem with this. He saw this as the beginning of, if they signed a contract with the military, then they would essentially be under military jurisdiction. He didn't want that. He wanted, of course, he's the Czar, he's the Sultan, so to speak. He wanted it all himself. He didn't want to sign that. And he tried to negotiate that part out, and they said no. No. He should have taken the deal. I'm sure he's going to get less money now. And who knows? 2 weeks down the road, 3 weeks down the road, he could be accidentally fragged by his own people. You would think that's suspicious, because he's nowhere near actual fighting, and he's fragged by accident by one of his own soldiers in his office. You don't want to get on the wrong side of shit like that with Russians. There are some nations, you just decent nations, but you don't want to fucking get on the wrong side of their intelligence agencies or their defense agency. I would say probably Lebanon's one, Turkey's another, certainly Russia, Japan. That's not good in Japan. I'm sure there's a lot of them out there, more than I know. Certainly, they can't call them a decent country now, but Egypt, you don't want to get picked up by the Egypt special fucking intelligence divisions. That could go way bad for you. Anyway, I've been blathering on and on about this. Much ado about nothing, in fact, is what happened. However, it wasn't much ado about nothing. It was much ado about money. It was much ado about money, and he was attempting to privatize or fully push for more privatization of the Russian Ministry of Defense, and the Russian Ministry of Defense said no. He thought it was an assault, a threat on his little entity that he had built, and he figured he could use that moment after the victory over the fucking cowardly conscripts that they had dragged off of the streets of Ukraine and thrown out into fucking the meat grinder. He thought he could use the victory over those people. All of them died shitting on themselves. As, momentum for getting acceptance from the Russian people for this. But of course, the Russian people aren't going to go for that either. maybe somebody in U.S. intelligence decided to strike. This was the target of opportunity for them. And I guess the way they looked at it was, if he's successful, which he won't be, that would be great. But most likely he's not going to be. But that's also great for them because they can say, look at the chaos. There was no chaos. Did they pay him money for this? Possibly. Was it a whole thing contrived to do that? No. This was a fucking billionaire trying to make a power grab because he was delusional. He literally surrounded himself with paid yes men who were armed. Mercenaries who would do anything for money. That's like hookers. It's like you surround yourself with a whole bunch of hookers. You're a pimp and you pay them and you surround yourself by a whole bunch of hookers. You're going to start to get an inflated fucking image of yourself after time. Same thing with him. Either way, it's over and done with. It's gone. And they handled it in the best way possible. They did not give the West and the intelligence agencies what they were hoping for, which is a bloodbath on the streets of fucking Russia. So, once again, Putin wins and we lose. It's so nice when you get to say that. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, the Cold War and all that shit. We always win, and oh my God, the wall's coming down, and oh my God, yay, capitalism, we're awesome. The waning days of empire, boys and girls. Thank you. Have a good Sunday.